right? You can't just get rid of energy. It has to be utilized and or it needs to be transformed, right? But energy is not something that you could just get rid of. You can't just get rid of it, right? And what a lot of people don't realize is that trauma is also energy. Trauma is also a form of energy, whether people are aware of it or not aware of it, right? And just like every other form of energy, trauma doesn't go to waste. Trauma doesn't go to waste. Nature won't allow trauma to go to waste. Like I said, nature doesn't waste energy. So, what ultimately ends up happening is that trauma serves a purpose. Okay? Trauma serves a purpose. And because it serves a purpose, there's a natural inclination to attach to it, to attach to the trauma because it serves a purpose, right? And the natural response, whenever you hear somebody say that they have trauma or you find out that somebody has trauma, the natural response that we mostly have is to try to find out the root cause of the trauma, right? You want to pinpoint the origin of the trauma in order to fix it, right? Let's find out what started the trauma, right? Let's follow the breadcrumbs, right? Let's talk about our childhood, right? This is one approach to psychology where you target the origin of the trauma in order to try to fix it, right? Now, the problem with this is that trying to find the origin of trauma can be a bottomless pit. Okay, once you go down that rabbit hole, there's no guarantee that you'll know where the trauma came from or what caused it, right? The mind is too complex to do that. It's too there's so many layers to it that trying to figure out the origin of your trauma could take a lifetime, right? Now, there's another approach to psychology where instead of trying to find out the origin of the trauma, instead of trying to figure out where it all started, you focus on what purpose the trauma has. What is the purpose of the trauma instead of the origin of the trauma? So you focus on the purpose of the phenomenon instead of the cause of the phenomenon. It's a different way to look at it because, like I said, nature doesn't waste energy. If there's attachment to a trauma, it's usually for a reason, right? So when you clinch to trauma, it's usually because the person consciously or unconsciously thinks it's useful. Like I'm gonna hold on to this trauma because fill in the blank, right? Fill it whatever you think is useful or whatever you can use from that trauma, that energy, you're gonna clinch onto it and you're gonna fill in the blank. I'm holding on to this trauma because fill in the blank, right? This idea of focusing on the purpose of the phenomenon instead of the cause is known as teleology, right? You focus on the purpose. What does the energy serve, right? What is the purpose of the phenomenon, not what caused the phenomenon? What caused the phenomenon is a bottomless pit, right? The trauma isn't going to go to waste. Nature's going to use it, right? Now, a lot of people, they hold trauma in order to pursue goals, right? Like sometimes these goals are unconscious. So somebody, for example, who they're subconsciously or consciously seeking attention, right? Or sympathy, they will take on the role of a victim, right? Something, when they have a martyr complex, they'll take on to a victim personality in order to get attention, right? This is a syndrome. This is textbook syndrome, right? So I'm reminded of the gladiators, right? Back in the day when they would fight in the Colosseum and in the arenas. These gladiators, these warriors that will go out and fight, right? Their life was on the line every day. Their soul was up for grabs every single day, and they were in a very traumatic environment, right? These gladiators that would go out and fight in these arenas, they suffered every form of abuse that you can think of growing up. Okay, these gladiators were abused by the guards, right? A lot of people don't know that these gladiators suffered through some of the most horrific, traumatic, and abusive experiences that you can think of, right? Leading up to them having to fight for their lives in the arena. And of course, there was a system in place where if you fought long enough or you won a certain amount of fights and you were alive and you didn't die, you were granted your freedom, right? And these gladiators would work their way up to their freedom. They would get their freedom. They would be let go, right? But then some of these gladiators, right, despite being in these horrific environments where you're fighting for your life and then you get your freedom, they would come back. They would go back to the arena voluntarily, right? Not against their will, voluntarily. They would go back to continue that lifestyle. Now, why would you do that, right? Why would anybody do that? Well, like I said, when you experience trauma, it's hard to let go of it, right? Because nature doesn't waste energy. You're going to find a purpose for that trauma. So what would these gladiators get from these traumatic experiences? They would get fame, right? They would get admiration. They would get attention. They would get a dopamine spike, right? With that relief after you won the battle, right? A lot of them had addictions to adrenaline, to danger, right? There was a purpose that the trauma was serving them, okay? And when they were let go, they would come back voluntarily because their psychological needs were no longer being met, right? This is the thing about psychological needs. We're born with needs, biological needs. You know, you need food, water, protein, all that jazz, all that good stuff. But we're also born with psychological needs. And we don't know what these needs are. It varies from person to person, right? A psychological need for attention for one person might be a psychological need for sympathy for another. So when you experience trauma, if your psychological needs are being met, you're going to hold on to it.